this is a project in Denmark, and a lot of our work, in fact, most of our work is outside Britain for some reason. I can't really explain why that is, but I'm happy. And this was a particularly happy project. It was for a new building in an area of Denmark that was economically deprived. And the building was to hold a collection of paintings which the region had. And they were paintings from spanning between 1770 and 1970 in all of the European styles. None of them are particularly world-class, but they had a tremendous meaning for the people in the region because they often showed parts of the region. And this image shows, well, I can't point because my camera doesn't mean anything. This shows the location of the building before it was made, and it's very typical of a Danish farm. This is a farmyard. It's in the country, so you drive for 2 hours through the countryside, and your eye is changed because you see extremely flat land and beautiful light. You know, it's like a dogma film. Sun falls at 22.5 degrees and is always golden. The gravel crunches under your foot, and then in a building somewhere, a family is having a stupendous argument. So it's like that. It has this rather beautiful agricultural building, a barn in English, and then there's a manor house which has a moat in front of it and an English garden behind it, and it has a history of musical concerts. So although it's out in the country, it is part of the culture of Denmark. And then on the open side of the farmyard was this view. It's extremely flat. I taught for a long time in Holland, which is flat, but this is transcendentally flat. It's flatter than anywhere I've seen, and it stretches into the ocean, and then there's a bird sanctuary and the sea. So it's magical. And these fields were made by people. They're not natural. They would have been the work of hundreds of years of people. And that, when I went to the location with the landscape designer and my fellow architects, this is what we wanted people to see when they first arrive. Because the competition proposed that view would be closed, but we took a chance and we won with what we're saying. So you arrive and you see the land before you see the building. And the building's on the left-hand side. And this decision made all sorts of things possible and all sorts of things difficult. So if you're a visitor, you arrive, and that view of the land is taken away because the building steps out. So you see the land, and then you don't see it. And then you go inside the cafe, and then in the cafe there's a view through a room for public art teaching, where you see, the English word is an orchard, where apples grow. So it's another part of the location. So throughout this building, the view of the land is given and it's taken away. And here, we're looking at the long gallery around which all of the art spaces are organized, and you can see at the end the view of the landscape is visible again. Around that courtyard are three types of space. There's this space, which is a temporary exhibition space, so it's very adaptable. And all of the galleries have zenithal lights, daylight, which can be adjusted down to darkness. So as you can see here, you can make one end of the gallery dark if you want to do that for conservation reasons, or it can be fully daylit. So you could have film and video in one part, and sculpture and paintings in the other. And then further along, there's a different type of gallery, which is where the permanent collection begins. This is early Danish Impressionism, so it's much lighter. And then on the other side of the corridor are a group of rooms like this, which are much smaller, something like 6 meters by 6 meters. And they have decorated ceilings. And in the decorated ceiling is that diamond shape is one of the zenithal roof lights, the 3 roof lights that you would see on the outside. And these are rooms for paintings from the Danish Golden Age, small, gold-framed, very intense. And these rooms are joined together en filade. But what we're doing here is that we're lighting the room with daylight from the roof light, from the zenithal, but the paintings are lit by electric light, so they have conservation levels. But as the light changes slowly, the room seems to be changing. And this way of making changes between galleries is important for me. If you have a gallery space, which is where the light comes from the top, and you have one gallery after another, even in a small museum like this, it has a particular experience. So when you go, and art spaces can be boring, they can be architecturally boring. But so what we're doing here is we're saying that the architecture of these spaces should be peripheral. That when you're looking at the art, you're looking this way. And when you're seeing the room, you're seeing it peripherally. So you don't notice the room, you look at the art, but the room changes in detail as you go from one room to another, and the light in it changes. So you have a stimulus in the periphery of your vision. At the end of that enfilade, there's another room for plaster casts, which are not light sensitive, so there's a view of the landscape. And then you leave that room, and then you find the room at the end, this room, which was an idea from the client. And the clients for this project were incredibly good. They took a year to write their program, and they hired a local architect who knew that that local architect would not build the building. But each time they had an idea, he showed them the consequences. So their brief was great. And this room, for just looking at the landscape, was their idea. It was not my idea. But it's one I like very much. So in the middle of the exhibition, you're given a room where you look outward and you look at the fields around you. So, and these are photographs. I didn't take these photographs. These are photographs that the museum, people who went to the museum posted on the web. And this is, fantastically kitsch, but beautiful. This is how people see architecture. It's not how architects see architecture. So, and what I want to say is that this is a thought, whether it's a reality for people in the gallery. What I feel is that the land outside is made by people, and the art inside is made by people. And so they're not equal, but they're both important. The labor of anonymous people is as important to me as the labor of talented artists. But when you look at this building from a distance, it's abstract, very abstract, but it's no more abstract, really, than the barn that you see on the left-hand side of the picture. And abstraction is associated with modernism, but it also existed in vernacular architecture, where builders would copy something, and they would throw part away, and then they would copy it again, throw another part away, until they got to the most minimal and cheapest and effective form. And it's that kind of abstraction that interests me. And here, what I want to say is that this part, the little part of the room, where the room that projects, where you see the landscape, talks to the building on the left. Well, it did until they knocked it down. So it used to have a kind of relationship with things in the landscape. And I often get accused of not showing plans. I'm going to bore you with plans this time. On the left-hand side is the entrance, and you can see that how the gallery is arranged along a central gallery. The rooms at the top of the plan are storage and conservation, and the room on the right-hand side is the room just for looking at the landscape. And then above, on the left-hand side, only on the left-hand side, there's offices and a library, and it's set back from the main facade, so they have privacy in view. So it's very reflective space, and people will go there to study the collection and read in the library. And this is, when we designed this project in the competition, we imagined that it would be a column structure, so that, in my anarchic way, the thought was that in 50 years' time, when people didn't want a gallery like this, they could turn it into another gallery. And I remember meeting the director of the gallery in Lucerne, who described that it had been designed originally as a series of small rooms, but then it had become loft-like spaces. And it seemed to me that that was interesting. But then our Danish colleagues said that you don't build with frame structures in Denmark, you build with concrete walls. So it gave us a different sense that these three rooms, these three spaces, sorry, I wonder if my pointer will work. Give me a second. Where is my pointer? Here. Oops. You got a preview of the next project. There's a geography in here which can't be changed, but within it, those partitions can be removed. So we gave the best flexibility that we could. And then we were, before the museum, this isn't running in time order because I've forgotten when everything was built. In fact, anyway, I have a problem with numbers. I can't really remember numbers anymore, so I don't know when they're pictorial. This is a pictorial lecture rather than a historical lecture. But we were invited to, we were in competition for an embassy, which was kind of astonishing since I'm a Republican, socialist, Buddhist, so why would they ask me? But they did. These things happen, And when we got the embassy, we thought that somebody from the government would say an embassy should look like this, and they didn't. It's interesting. That's not how it works. Governments employ architects that they think are notable, and then they say, you design it, and then our embassy is an expression of the design talent of our country, which is fantastically liberal. But it means that you have to decide what an embassy looks like. So I'll explain what our embassy looks like through this photograph. This shows that, in fact, has two facades, and there's a good pragmatic reasons for that, because in Warsaw, the temperature is very high in summer and very low in winter, and so you have to get rid of the heat in the summer, and then in the winter you have to thermally insulate the building. So a double facade does that. It's not magic. The heat is conducted away. You open the top and the bottom, and the hot air is taken away, and you control light by blinds on the inside, so it's much easier to maintain. But the imagery is this. What should an embassy look like? Well, the outer skin reflects the natural world. So it's not, I think I wanted to do almost anything but make a building which reinforced the authoritative regime of my country. So it's a building which reflects the nature around it, but there are political issues. If you, like we did, decide it's a really good idea to join with America and invade Iraq, you shouldn't be surprised if people want to blow up your embassies for 30 years. So, of course, you have to make a building which is blast resistant, and the inside facade that you can see here is hugely thick. The glass is 4 centimeters, and then it's triple glazed, and you can't pick it up, and you could fire a 9mm pistol at it and it would bounce off, and if you explode a bomb it might break a bit, but it's pretty secure. So the message is that there's a natural world in which politics exists, and that inside it there's a complete resistance to the anarchy of people who want to do bad things to democracy. That's my explanation. But the other thing to say is that the buildings, I mean, we recognize this shape. It's an attic on a building. But there were reasons for it. Without being unduly functionalist, you have to put certain rooms, like the ambassador's room, can only go above certain departments in case people listen. And so what is an embassy? Well, embassy really is an office building with an espionage department. You know, it's an office building with spies. So the top floor, which on our drawing is said to be plant, is actually jammed with listening equipment, which we didn't have anything to do with. In fact, when I went to the site once, there were 2 men, obviously from the army, standing on the concrete, and I said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We're making sure that all of the steel reinforcing that goes into the concrete really is steel reinforcement and not microphones." And I said, "I won't get in your way." And then they spent a lot of time describing how the Russian embassy had drilled for 30 meters under the road to listen to the British embassy. So it's not that interesting. And we said we did meet the espionage department. We were taken, this building replaced a building in central Warsaw, which were 2 rather handsome villas, and the Polish government had to give back property that the communist regime had taken away. So 2 elderly ladies from Brooklyn came and reclaimed the British embassy, so we had to build a new one. And I've forgotten where I was going with this story. There's a point to this, but I'll... Anyway, well, what it means is that you get gardens each end, and so one end you have a garden for the people who work in the embassy, and then the other end is a garden for the ambassador, where you can meet people like Saddam Hussein or Kim Il-jong in private. And inside, the facade you see on the left is the external facade, so it's very, very quiet. And then the Polish culture is that you need lots of daylight in the building, so we have these internal gardens which provide daylight into the space. And then you can't avoid having some element of ceremony, and the element of ceremony is in this entrance portico where other ambassadors come and the Queen of England comes, and so that's its purpose. But further along, when you come into an embassy, you have to be searched. And if you're in a vehicle, they search the underside. So going into an embassy is invasive in a way. It has to be. And if you go for a visa, which you do online now, but when this building was built, you had to visit the embassy. We said that those people who are visiting the embassy should not be treated the way that most people are when you make an embassy, where you're sent around the back. And many times I've stood in the past outside the American embassy in London with one's possessions in a shopping bag waiting to go in the rain, and so we thought we could do better than that. So along the right-hand side is a glazed but secure screen where people going to the visa section can see the gardens and see the embassy, and then around the back there's an entrance for them which is just as dignified as the main entrance. And these are to say that even with curtain wall, there are things that can be said. All building materials if you're witty and thoughtful and keep looking into them, will say something. Plans, okay. So this is the ground floor. This is the first floor, and then I can't show you the top floor, which is an espionage floor. So I could show you the ambassador's floor with the gardens, but then I have to show you this sketch of the entrance in the place of the espionage department. So I hope you enjoy it. The next project is, do you know, I really can't read that. It says City Hall in Belgium. This is in a place called Dense near Ghent in Belgium. In Northern Europe, there's an interest in the representation of local politics to the population. And we won this project because the building that you see in the front, which is the debating chamber, is visible to the surroundings. But it's a building that has two parts. One is the building at the back, which are where the workers work, and then the one at the front is the debating chamber. And both of them have a shaded facade. It's a low energy building with natural ventilation, and that shaded facade is used in a particular social way. So the other thing says that although this is a fairly abstract building, it does talk to the church opposite through its materiality and form and alignments, but it also talks to the rather less interesting buildings in the surroundings, because they too are part of the town. They're the kinds of buildings that the town has chosen to make. So it's also a building where we were exploring what you can do as a foreign architect in a country, and you work with the materials that are regularly used in those countries. And in Belgium, precast concrete is extremely good, stone fixing extremely good, anodized aluminium very good. So we work with those materials, and you can see some of the qualities that we get. It is a monochromatic building, it's slightly polychromatic, but the intention was that it would be sober and dignified and somehow would represent the type of building construction technique and culture that existed in Belgium. And so when you come in, you come under the debating chamber, and looking back, you see the town that you're in. And this is a bit like the museum in Denmark where views are framed. It's that. And then there's an entrance hall where you're met, and a staircase which goes up to the debating chamber, and then workspaces. And so they're naturally ventilated, daylit, tall ceilings, so you use daylight as much as possible. And sometimes they're separated, and sometimes they're open. So it's flexible. It's a flexible space. And then, but the working spaces are good. The client here was also good. They decided that they would make a building which was much bigger than they needed, so that it would last 100 years. So in the beginning, people had enormous amounts of space, and little by little, it will be filled up. And so the office spaces are great. You know, if you sit on the corner, you get views of the surroundings. But what I want to say is that these loggias have a function other than just shading their building. They have a social function, and not just this function where people eat outside, which is, people eat together in Belgium, and it's very much like Denmark, where they have lunch rooms and people bring food. So there's a certain set of social rituals which are very important, and there's outdoor space where people can sit and look at the river, and then the cafe itself has views of the surroundings. But what's really charming about this building is that it's so public. When we in the middle of designing it, there was an attack on a regional Flemish town hall. And we said, look, we can put security in here. You won't notice it, but we can put it in. And they said, we don't want it. We don't care. this is a building for the people of Deinsor, and people do visit it. It's, this is a true photograph. And this is the council chamber, and the council chamber looks out over the city, and the city sees the council chamber. So until they put curtains up, there's a literal and political transparency in this project. But let's look at this project not through architectural photographs, but through the local press. This is the opening day. And what does a press photographer do? Well, he climbs to the roof of the church and takes the worst possible photograph from an architectural perspective that you can imagine, which shows the building as it actually is. And then this is the mayor, who's fantastically nice, very proud of the building, and the mayor's family. This is what real people are like. And this is the building in its location, and these are some of the views, some of the plans which show that it's very simple. It's got 2 cores and it's flexible. And there's a little bit of underfloor air in the middle because it's quite deep. It's something like, I think it's about 20 meters wide, so you need a little bit of air in the middle. But it means also you can put enclosed offices in the middle. And okay, and this is in London, I can see. Yeah, this is tiny. This is a project that we did outside the Tower of London, which has historic significance. And it's attached to Tower Bridge. And so if you build here, what should it look like? Well, there are 2 answers existing in the surroundings. One is the ticket office, which is further up by another practice, which is high-tech and says, we've got nothing to do stylistically with the Tower of London. We're part of the office development across the road. And then there are other buildings along the river edge where you can buy food and coffee, and they look like garden sheds, and they're painted brown, and they say, we're invisible, we don't exist. So being a kind of big head, I wanted to make a building, our building, which composed with the Tower of London. And so it does because it's made of wood, which is a natural material like the stone of Tower of London. It's painted it's stained the same color as the Tower of London. But if you look, I need to point here. This is going to be difficult. This, yeah. Well, the main block in the middle of the photograph is like one of the towers turned upside down. So it's like, instead of it being like that, it's like this. So you can do that. After Cubism, you can do things like that. You can turn things upside down. So. And on the left of the picture is the outside terrace, which has got roof-shaped forms, and they are blind so that in the summer it's comfortable to sit out there. But also, you can extend the eating season because they're rainproof. So it's a proper restaurant. It's not just for tourists. It sits right on the edge of where the moat used to be, and so when you go there, you experience the Tower of London close up, and you see it from where you sit. Or from this side, which is unashamedly romantic, you see Tower Bridge. Tower Bridge, which is a kind of classic Victorian, vulgar piece of technology. In the 19th century, the Victorians had tons of money, lots and lots of money, through our colonialism, and they spent it very badly, on gestures. It's a bit like London right now, where you see lots and lots of office buildings which are meaningless. So it seems to me that it's not uninteresting to be able to sit and look at that. In fact, there isn't anywhere on the river edge where you can comfortably sit and just look at Tower Bridge, but here you can. And then on the terrace, there's a terrace. But what I want to say here is that that the metalwork that we put up somehow rhymes with the metalwork of Tower Bridge. Now, this happens a lot with all architects. When, as architects, we're thinking about a project and a location, we see it consciously, but we also notice it in that area of vision which I've mentioned in the art museum. So it's that peripheral noticing that interests me. And I didn't make this connection when I designed it, but it's in there. And if you look at Alvaro Caesar's drawings, you can see how it's evident. He's kind of alive to possibilities in the surroundings. And I'm not the same architect that Caesar is, who's very brilliant, but I notice things too. And these would just give you some idea of the scale. On the top of the picture is the Tower of London, and the small red building is our building. And these are the plans. It goes under Tower Bridge, and then it's got 3 parts. And it's interesting, we had to deal with the historic England. You've got tremendous powers, and I thought, usually with these people, you're incredibly reticent. You don't say very much, and you listen to where they're coming from, and then you try to go around their prejudices. And for some reason, I thought, I don't want to do that anymore. And they're actually rather reasonable people. And I said that I was interested in some of Frank Gehry's schemes, where there's an assemblage of different shapes. And there was a kind of pause, and they said, that sounds great. So we made some progress here. And then, when we'd finished it, the Historic Buildings Department had their Christmas dinner in our restaurant. So we really, as you say in football in England, it was a result. We got a result here. And you can see the scale of it in relation to Tower Bridge. And this is apartment buildings in Westkai, in Antwerp. And this is a view from the developer's office. And what you can see in the middle of the picture is a red stone building by the Dutch practice Neutling Redijk, which is called the Museum aan de Stroom. And then here is the finished project of what we did. There was a kind of tongue, a land tongue of in the harbour. And Roger Diener made 2 buildings, one of which you can see on the left, and then David Chipperfield made 2 buildings, and then we made the other buildings. And so it all started really well, and the original developer, was very ambitious and had great taste, and Roger made buildings covered in glass. And then a developer, a much harder Dutch developer, bought the project in the middle. So David Chipperfield built a white concrete building with splendid balconies. Yeah, we thought, well, let's be fantastically economical and make one building that looks like 2 buildings, So it's a brick building with windows in it, manipulated by horizontals and verticals. And for some reason, this project and the next project, which is in your country, I'm doing these fantastically deadpan buildings. I can't explain why I'm doing it, but there are reasons. But I could say that I was interested in Solowit's wall drawings, which are much more beautiful than this, that an architecture which has simple rules and produces something with consequences, hand on heart. So here we have a building which has got, one of them's got horizontal projecting bricks and the other's got vertical projecting bricks, but there's a bit more to it than that. The one on the right-hand side has a crown, a lit-up crown, an act of some vulgarity, but it's it's at the head of the river, so it can be significant. But its energy comes from the way that, depending on who's got their lights on, the facade changes. But one important thing is that if you want to make this diagram work, you have to leave the corners open. Otherwise, it doesn't look right. And there are reasons for doing that. So this is what it looks like. I'm in my deadpan phase. Don't ask me why. But it's not. I mean, it's got pleasure. You know, if you look at it, there's detail. We asked ourselves, would somebody climb up the face of the building? You know, as architects, you have these absurd worries about people climbing up. So we decided that. Well, my partner said, "Well, let's do this," and I said, "But it looks like that scene from Star Trek where people disappeared." And he said, "Yes." So we said, "Well, that's all right then." So we left it, and then it's elegant, you know. And these are real estate agents' photographs from the letting site of the apartments. So they have presence. If you build in, you know, the Docklands in Antwerp are not far from the centre of the city, but there's not much around them. What can you do to make something where you'd want to live? Well, you enjoy the view and you frame the view. And so this is why the corners are open, partly for pictorial reasons, but partly because you're in a landscape that's going to change. Over the next 50 years, that landscape will alter, and sitting on your balcony, you'll see it. That's your context. It's not neighbours across the street, it's the whole city. And it's simple, but the horizontality of the river works with the verticality of the towers, and this is the master plan. When you work in Holland or Belgium, you're given a master plan which is completely inexplicable, and you say, "Could we change it?" And they go, "Please don't." You know, so you kind of make sense of. You're always making sense of things. So you could be angry about that, but actually, if you think of what it must have been like to be an architect working in the plan of Paris devised by Haussmann, where they thought it was a really good idea to have triangular buildings at about the one point. So you have to be skillful at making triangular apartments wonderful. You know, I think as architects we have to accept that cities come into being for all sorts of reasons that we don't understand, but we don't have to accept that. We have to energize it into being something good, and that's what I'm trying to do here. And these are the plans. They're very simple. And this is another building. Oh yeah, this is in your country. This is in Neuhausen, in another canton. And you probably know this, but there's a fantastic waterfall. We went to visit the waterfall with Ralph Bletler. The waterfalls are fantastically noisy, you know. I said to Ralph, can they turn it off at night? You know, he knows me, so he knows that it's a joke. But what's it like? Well, we've got this curious bunch of buildings to develop, and it is quite typical, I think, that there's a sort of very loose planning, if there's any planning at all, and then the industrial district happens at the edge of town, and it's an uneasy coalition with smaller buildings. And so this was the sketch that we showed, which won the project, where we said that the building on the left in that sketch is the building that you can see on the left of the photograph next to it, which is a factory building. And the building to the right is a building behind our development, which was getting south light from what would be the piazza, and we wanted to preserve that by making a building with three parts to it, which could be manipulable, and we did. That's what we're doing. This is another one of those buildings where they're very simple, I can't explain, but this one's got, the one on the left looks over the waterfall, the one in the center looks south over what will be called Industry Platz, and then there's a small building that is kind of, it's like a child that's perpetually wondering why it isn't bigger, and it used to talk to the buildings across the street, which were small, but then about 3 months into the project, we were shown a scheme on the other side of the street, which is 20 floors high in concrete. So these things happen. So it would, when you're looking out over the Platz, it will have a rather urban quality, and when you're looking out over the waterfall, it will be much more dreamy and elegant. And the side facing the waterfall will have a lot more glass in it, and so the aim is that it's, as far as possible, more reflective than the buildings that are on the horizon are much more like the water in the waterfall. And these are some of the sketches. Well, originally we were going to do it in precast concrete, but now we're going to do it in stucco, in crépi, for good reasons. And this is the planning idea. There are 3 buildings, 3 apartments on the left and 3 on the right, arranged around a hall. And the facades are systematic. Sometimes they've got vertical projections, sometimes horizontal projections, sometimes they're just flat. So I'm increasingly interested in what you can do with a very small vocabulary. And this is, these next projects are to show how housing, which in this case is housing for sale, how large-scale housing schemes can be romantic and can be real places. So this is in North Amsterdam on the river. I'll show you the master plan. Hang on. This is the development plan. Our scheme is, well, I'll have to point. This is our scheme. This is Alvaro Caesar's scheme. So Alvaro Caesar, being great, got the river, and we had to look at the back at Caesar's building, which I'm all right with. He's a hero. But so what do you do about that? Well, you make a building where the balconies are so big you can see around Alvaro Caesar's building and look at the river. And there was a terrific moment. In Holland, it's collaborative, and so we had to attend these workshops, huge workshops, where everybody says something, and they have a supervisor. And the supervisor said to, somebody said, can you tell Alvaro Caesar that the windows that he's got facing our building are too small? And Caesar's an old functionalist. If it faces south, it's big. If it faces north, it's small, So the supervisor had the unenviable task of asking Alvaro Caesar to make his windows bigger. And the supervisor was a friend of mine called Jeroen Gerst, and he said, Professor Caesar, having executed one of your buildings, I hope you'll realize I'm your biggest fan. And Caesar went straight up to him, looked him in the face and said, I didn't notice. And it was like extraordinary. This very nice, affable man suddenly became like some old bruiser coming from his corner and went bang. And then he sat down again and was perfectly nice. But it was a real lesson in that sometimes menace works in architecture. But so you get these very big balconies, and what's characteristic of our scheme was that they often, apartments had 2 balconies, so they could look in 2 directions and see 2 bits of the river. And when you look at the river, there are cruise ships which are as big as this building, so it's extraordinary. And it's in a part of Amsterdam that was never developed. The Amsterdam that we all know of the canals is in the south, but the north was always the place where they put people in prison or hung them or something like that. It really was the Nowheresville. So what stylistic gesture should you make? Well, we thought that if we used a German travertine, we would make something which was curiously like a building that might be in New York or any other European city. So it was suave and apartment-like. And sometimes the balconies, these balconies have got glass block floors, so it really does work. The light underneath them into the apartments is still good, but there are moments when there's this terrific drama of the balcony being close to the ground, and then I've shown you the slide. And these are the plans. There's 2 cores and a lot of different varieties of apartments. And it's interesting, in Dutch architects wouldn't do this. They'd develop 2 apartment types and make them work everywhere. And being crazy and British, we decided we'd do lots. These are penthouses on the roof. And another project in Amsterdam, which was less resplendent, but here we were able to use a Danish grey brick to give it some dignity. And again, the master plan was bizarre because there was a huge sheet of water and lots of view, and everything was pointing in the wrong direction. So we made a plan where we put a core in the middle of the building, and you could stretch the rooms around the outside so they got some view, and you could put a balcony on anywhere, which meant that the uniformity, which was part of the project, you've got repeated blocks, would be destabilized and destroyed. So, and it made a building which can be freestanding as an elevation, or it can be part of a group. And then the entrances are interesting. So you can make interest if you keep thinking about what it would be like to live there and what it would be like to go into the entrance hall each day, and will it be somewhere that you will enjoy. And a lot of buildings, housing in Holland is not enjoyable because for Dutch architects it's just ordinary, it's what they do, so it's not a high priority for them. For us it's an incredible opportunity to make something where people will, or successive people will live for many years. And these are some of the plans. This is a really strange product. The Dutch government created a market for private housing. Before that, it was almost solidly rental, social housing. So it was very difficult for people to move in the city. They had to make multiple arrangements to move. So the Amsterdam government particularly made a market and made its the Amsterdam owns the land, you see, so it can do anything it wants. So it made a market housing possible. And then housing associations realized that they had a huge stock of houses with incredible value that they could borrow against. So they started to make experimental projects. And this was one of them. This is called Solid 11. And the director of the housing association, which is called Het Oosten, the housing association in the East, Frank Beidendijk, was one of these activists, and he said he wanted to make a building which would last 200 years, like the canal houses, and was flexible and reinterpretable. So effectively it's a pair of loft buildings, and with a courtyard space in the middle, and it's part of a master plan, which I think I'll show you. 3 buildings are the same, but we were interested here in how those buildings that you might see in Chicago at the turn of the 20th century looked. Rather sober, brick, but with a lot of incident which had purpose. So here on the side we see the top parts recessed because it allows an alignment with the housing across the street, and on the south side there are lots of different balconies, so wherever you put a partition you'll get a balcony. And then the courtyard is communal. This is very Dutch. There's literally nobody has curtains and everybody sees everybody. And the way that this was occupied was that there was an auction and people rented space for a period of time, and then they built it themselves. So sometimes there are apartments like this, rather good self-built apartments, and this is, or there's a dentist, there's a Polish dentist, and then there's Carol, the hairdresser, who washes hair in his living room. So it's very vital and rather interesting. And then the penthouses on the top are reflective so that you see the city. What I've discovered is that if you start simply, complexity almost always occurs in the design of a building. Here, the tree structures which hold up the glass acoustic screen can be seen against the view of Amsterdam. And if you're living in this building, you really are living in the city. You know, if you're going to build it in the city, let's make it really urban. It won't appeal to everybody, but those people it appeals to very deeply. And these are the plans. So it can be turned into an office building, lots of other things. This is not the final project. There's the last two projects. Is a building, an apartment building in near Arnhem in the east of Holland, and it's to replace a building which was a manor house, which was destroyed by the Canadian Army by mistake, thinking that it was German headquarters, but it wasn't. It was a manor house. So there hasn't been a manor house there since. And the owners, the lord of the manor, the Dutch lord of the manor, wants to build a building there, which is not a manor house, because who wants to live in a manor house? He has a manor house anyway, so he wants apartments, an apartment building. So we're in a direct challenge with the historic authorities who don't want this. So we'll see how this one goes. But the idea is that each apartment has a 180-degree view of the landscape, which is astonishing. The landscape is astonishing. And on this side, facing south, it faces a lake. And our argument is that it's a series of landscapes in the landscape which the historic buildings people do not accept at all. And I can understand why they don't, but so we have to see how this one goes. But it's made of French limestone, and then there's also a smaller building which used to be a coach house, which you approach through the garage, and then it looks like this. So that one will, next time I lecture, it'll either be built or we'll be in prison. We'll see. And then these are some of the plans. You can see that the apartments, that there's 2 apartments on each floor, so they're very, very big. And they're arranged around an element in the middle so that you get this fluidity of the plan. The bedrooms entrance and the living room entrance are not separated, but they're discrete, you know, so that if you've got guests, somebody's in their bedroom can come out with some drama, you know. We're quite knowledgeable about what it's like to live in large houses. We've done a lot of large houses, and you need to provide a variety of spaces and an ability to re-experience the space again and again and re-experience the landscape. Oh yeah, on this smaller one, there's an historically protected wall in front of them, so the living areas will go on the first floor so they can see the lake, and the bedrooms will go on the ground floor so that the bedrooms will open out into the garden. So if you have family, the kids can play, and then you can group in the evening and look at the landscape. And the final project is a house we made for Anish Kapoor, which is curiously within an apartment building. It's very difficult in London to find open sites, and Anish, in order to build this, had to buy the leases of all of the apartment buildings above what is a long ground floor space. So on the left you see the garage entrance to Anish's, on the right the entrance to his house, and in the middle the door to the apartments above. Now this was a very long building, and it had very few places where you could bring light into it, mainly from above. So it's arranged around courtyards, but the important thing is that the surfaces are moderately reflective, so that whatever light you get is sustained by the materials. And the entrance, that's the entrance coming in from the street, and this is a view as if you were coming in from the entrance of the street. So you can see on the left there's a lacquer cabinet which is reflective. The stone floor is light with grey in it, and then above the the hallway is a concealed lighting. So there's a series of ways to make this work. And then you come in past a courtyard. This is a very confusing photograph because it's a courtyard with a Dan Graham sculpture in the middle of it. And then you find the living room, and the living room has a stair on the right that takes you up to the bedrooms. And beyond you see a garden, and then that's the stair that takes you up to the bedrooms. There's a change of level. And perhaps you can see above here, that ceiling has glass in it, and it's a courtyard above. I'll show it you. So wherever we could find a way to bring light into this plan, we did. And the result is that it's very light. And then there's a courtyard garden, and on the left is a corridor that goes up some steps and through a small library into the parents' bedroom, which looks back over the garden. And so this is what it's like in the garden. So walking through this corridor is a delight, and the garden's wild now. And here we have it again. And then that's the bedroom looking back toward the house. And it's the bedroom's little house itself. And you can see on the left of this photograph is a staircase that takes you down to the bathroom, which is under the garden. This is what you have to do in places like London. You have to bury things. And then if we go back again to the living room and go up this staircase, you'll see that there's a glass floor and a courtyard to the right and a family room. And then there are two children's bedrooms, which I'm not showing. But so it again, as in the project for Holland, there are a variety of spaces where the light will be different in each part of the day, and they're not really fixed purposes for these rooms. They can be used in lots of different ways, or they have different moods and characters. So if you want to read a book in the afternoon, you might go here, or if you've got a group of people, you'd entertain them in the living room and eat. So it's doing what big houses really should do, providing a series of graceful spaces whose character is given by their location. And that's the only elevation this is the back elevation. That's all we have. So, and these are the plans. And the section, you can see it's very low. There was a constraint on the height. And that's it. Thank you.